Welcome to TaxSale Insiders, the latest from TaxSale Resources, bringing you information about tax sales from experts in the industry. We interviewed Randy Saunders, partner at Nelson Mullins Riley & Scarborough, based in Huntington, West Virginia. Nelson Mullins has a unique position of having law offices that focus on the tax lien and tax deed process in several different states. But in today's interview, Randy will focus on West Virginia specifically. With a wide range of experiences in multiple states across this industry, Randy shares a unique perspective and also an excellent overview of how to safely invest in West Virginia. So sit back and relax for another episode of TaxSale Insiders, powered by TaxSale Resources.
Welcome everybody to another episode of TaxSale Insiders. I'm your host, Brian Seidensticker. I'm also the CEO of TaxSale Resources, and with me today, I was lucky enough to snag Randy Saunders from Nelson Mullins, which is one of the leading attorneys in the industry, and they provide services in several states. And Randy, I won't steal your thunder. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And so my name is Randy Saunders. I'm with the Huntington, West Virginia office of Nelson Mullins. I'm licensed in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. I've also got associates here in my office on my team that are licensed in Ohio, and Virginia, and Alabama. We've got 25 offices across the United States, and we're a little over 800 attorneys right now. And so obviously this is something that we do over a large geographic area. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about West Virginia, and I think in the future we'll be discussing some additional states.
And I guess Randy, real quick, Randy's one of the few offices that focus in tax liens. It's even one of the fewer that happen to be licensed and practice in multiple states. And so I guess, Randy, to my knowledge, you're really one of maybe a couple that I'm aware of that actually cover a lot of the country as far as a one-stop shop, which is extremely rare in this extremely niche part of real estate. But thanks again. I guess the other thing I wanted to mention to everyone that's listening is there's Randy is co-author. We can see that co-author of several great white papers, and I think you guys are still kind of working on several more, Randy, which is great. This one's on West Virginia, and so anybody that wants to go read that, it's on our website. It's called The Comprehensive Guide to Understanding West Virginia Tax Sales, and we'll focus on West Virginia today. And hopefully we'll have you back or other folks in your office back to kind of talk about some of the other states that you cover as well.
And I should also mention Matt Abey, who's in our Columbia, South Carolina office. He does a lot throughout the Southeast and is pretty well known in the industry. And then we've also got Carl Fumarola in our Boston office, who's in the Northeast. So to your point, we have several offices that have partner and associate teams that focus on this niche area.
Excellent. Well, Randy, I'll start off with a softball here, only because I'm always interested how folks drop into this industry. I have yet to meet anybody that had dreams as a young boy or girl of growing up to be an investor or an attorney in this space. So I guess give us a little background. How did you end up being so dominant in this space?
So honestly, as my career began to develop at an early associate stage, I was doing a lot of work for banks and financing companies. And then I was also doing some real estate work. And I happened upon this, practice area when I was working with a large financial institution that was actually lending to entities that were purchasing tax liens or tax deeds, but they were also, potentially losing properties or not redeeming properties. And so they kind of had a couple issues where they needed help. And then as I started to work with them, I started to get more and more interested in it. And I just found that the investor side, because of the number of different components, I mean, if you're looking at the corporate structure, if you're looking at the financing, if you're looking at the lien space itself, there's just a lot of interesting areas. And at a firm this size, we're kind of able to assist all the way through. So no, you're right. When I was a little boy growing up in Des Moines, Iowa, I didn't think that one day that I would end up being a tax lien attorney in Huntington, West Virginia. But it worked out. And I can say I really enjoy what I do. I enjoy working with the folks that I work with. And I find it's interesting. It's a little bit different all the time. And it's always fun because if it's Alabama, if it's Kentucky, if it's South Carolina, somebody's always keeping us on our toes. And so it's interesting to see kind of how it shifts. And I think when we have a broad geographic area that we cover, it helps us kind of keep our ears and eyes on the trend. And so kind of helps us navigate our clients through, some of where the better opportunities are.
And you hit the nail on the head with it keeps it fresh, right? I'm learning something every day, multiple things every day in this industry, and I guess some of the viewers will kind of have heard this before, but I got started in the professional world in an entirely different industry, in the aerospace industry, helping launch rockets for government contracts, and it was a great first life, I call it, but this industry is certainly much more engaging from how much I learn on a daily basis. It's amazing. Well, I guess we'll dive into the nitty gritty stuff of what folks actually probably want to hear. But
yeah,
I guess since we're focusing on West Virginia, I'm not real familiar with. I'm familiar with many states. West Virginia is not one of them. So I'm gonna be learning a lot along with the rest of the audience, Randy. But I guess give me can you just give a quick kind of overview of West Virginia in general, and then we can dig into the specifics?
Yeah, and so originally, as I said, I'm from Iowa originally. My wife is from West Virginia. So everybody asks how I ended up here, and she agreed to marry me, so I live in West Virginia. And so, West Virginia is a state of 1.8 million people. We have 55 counties. It is a very cohesive, family, tight-knit, state. And so I think that one of the most important things as you make your way into West Virginia is understanding that the jurisdictions, that you understand where you're going, and that you have some of the contacts that can help you navigate where you're looking to do business, and understanding the local players, the court, some of those things. And I'm sure that's probably important in a lot of states. But two of the states that we usually really focus on that are Kentucky and West Virginia, because I do think it's important. When you look at the opportunities in the state, I don't think this is a state where you go in as an investor and you say, I'm going to outlay capital across all 55 counties, and I'm going to blanket it, and that's going to be my investment strategy. I think when you go in, you want to look at some different factors. And so also having a local contact that can kind of identify where are the markets that are going to be beneficial for return on investment, assuming this plays out in a way where you end up with a tax deed. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think you have to have in West Virginia kind of a tiered strategy. And so let me take a step back and just talk a little bit about how the tax lien process works in West Virginia. So the sheriff will sell the tax lien at auction. And it's funny because I pulled this statute up because, Brian, I know you and I have talked a lot about Alabama. And so under the statute, it says October 14th through November 23rd for all 55 counties on the courthouse stairs during regular business hours, West Virginia Code 11A35. Now, I will tell you, I have been to several. They have been inside. Most of us would think that's not a big deal, but if you've been in Alabama lately, you understand there could be big problems if you're having that auction inside or you're having that auction outside. But obviously that hasn't been an issue here. But the sheriff will sell the tax lien. And at that point, that day you have to pay either by certified check or other funds by close of business for whatever tax liens you purchase. And then you have an 18-month period that begins to run. And that's the redemption period. So in West Virginia, the due process period is prior to the issuance of the tax deed. So during that 18-month period, then the property owner or anybody else who will get notice has the opportunity to redeem. And you can work with them, you can set up payment plans. Unlike Kentucky, where a payment plan is required, West Virginia doesn't have a requirement for it, but you're not prohibited from doing a payment plan. If they do not redeem, and if you've got all of your notices and everything in order, you go down after April 1st, following 18 months from the sale, if it was October 14th or October 23rd. And there's been some recent argument over, because the statute says 18 months, but it also says beginning on April 1st. And so our state auditor has taken the position that the right to issue the tax deed begins on April 1st, even if that due process period hasn't totally run, because obviously if it's a November 23rd sale, April 1st isn't going to give them the full 18 months. So you want to watch that. And I think you want to err on the side of caution. And for right now, what I would advise clients to do, if you hit that April 1st deadline, go ahead and go down and apply for your tax deed. And so at that day, you will walk out with a tax deed and own the property encumbrance free. So whatever judgment liens, and I mean, there's a few exceptions that we would, anticipate, but for the most part, the liens, mortgages, everything it's eradicated, and you're taking that encumbrance free. Now, the one thing that you have to be a little bit concerned about is that there's a 3-year statute of limitations for an action to set aside. And over like the last decade, our Supreme Court has been pretty clear that they're going to require strict compliance with the statute. And that gets back why it's important when you're in West Virginia on the front end to work with an attorney so that you make sure after everything comes out and the sheriff provides all the information to the state auditor's office, then it's going to start to fall on you. And we'll go over that in a moment, kind of what's required from the notice perspective. And you're kind of working with the state auditor's office. And if you get challenged and you can't show strict compliance, then there's a good chance, very good chance, that it's going to be overturned. And part of it is, in West Virginia, our judges are elected in all 55 states. And so, I may go to a county in West Virginia and we're looking through, and you've got a local constituents that's there that didn't maybe understand the tax lien process. The court says it's strict compliant. These are very sympathetic, movements oftentimes. So, in that situation, most of the times we tell the clients, if we get into that and there's anything in that, what we would call, pre-tax deed servicing file, because really here, your servicing file on this is all going to be, prior to the issuance of the tax deed. There's a good chance, but really the only time you have to end up in court in West Virginia is if there's an action to set aside the tax deed. Now, I will say that once you want to try to insure your tax deed, what you're probably going to want to do, because I'm not sure, again, I don't do the insurance aspect of it, but my experience has been most folks, to insure it, they're going to want a quiet title action, which is a pretty easy, again, assuming that you go back through and that all your notice requirements and statutory obligations were met. The quiet title process, can be done 8 months to 12 months. It's slowed, obviously, over the last 18 months, like everything else, because of COVID. But it's not an overly onerous process.
Got it.
But on that, and I know I went in a few different directions, but any specific questions you want me to pick up on there?
Yeah, I think let's go down a few rabbit holes, but I guess I'll start back at the very beginning. So the sales themselves, they happen in all 55 counties, and they all happen between October, was it 23rd and November 14th or something like
Yeah,
that?
October 14th
Okay.
and November 23rd. So and then, that's, there'll be notice. The sheriff takes care of all of the noticing, all of the legal advertising, all that stuff leading up to the sale.
Okay.
And what I would say is that with all 55 counties, there are requirements for, being able to participate in those sales.
Mhm.
And again, with 55 different counties, what I always recommend to my clients is, that the statutes may lay out certain obligations, but I find if you're going to go into these 6 counties, call those counties, find out what they require, and quite frankly, August or September right now would be the time that I would do that, to make sure you have everything in place that you need to do.
Okay. Yeah, I think you answered my next question as far as like pre-sale attendance, as far as registering for those auctions, putting
Yes.
deposits down. It sounds like those vary from one county to the next. Just make sure around this time, which is, I guess we're in August now, but earlier in the late summer, early fall is when you need to be reaching out, not a day before the auction, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Now, as far as the auctions themselves, I know this is ever evolving, but as of today, are any online, or are they all in person?
So West Virginia is not, so even in our 55 counties for our civil docket, we're at about 27, I think, that are actually like e-file at this point. And currently, what the statute requires them to actually take place, in the courthouse steps, and it's live. So there is no, that I'm aware of, there is no, ability to attend online. Now, what I would say is, with COVID, I'm not aware where that changed in any capacity. And I tell you, just because some of our counties are so rural and so small, I would doubt that, that would be something that in the foreseeable future that we would see.
Okay. So without statute changes, the likelihood of some counties going online is very, very low, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned, and I guess I want to reiterate, because, states do differ, but it sounds like West Virginia is a very much of a, say, relationship-based, investment strategy, not a blanket investment strategy.
Yes.
And I guess if I were to put a blanket strategy state out there, Florida would be a good example, where you can place capital across multiple counties in the state of Florida. They're all online, and it's fairly easy to do so. You don't necessarily have to have those, relationships to make sure that everything is running smoothly. In West Virginia is really more in line with, I'll say, states like Ohio, where it's very important to have those relationships there locally. Otherwise, you may run into snags here and there, just by the culture of the state. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and I think it's on the front end. It's at the time, it's from the judicial system, and then also on the back end. What do you do with your investment? I think you have to look at, so a lot of times what I recommend is, you've got Marshall University in Huntington, you've got WVU in Morgantown, you've got the Capitol that's in Kanawha County in Charleston, Putnam County's a bedroom community. You've got like Berkeley County, Jefferson County, that are kind of over by Washington, D.C. And so you kind of go in and you look, okay, what's my strategy? Well, if you're looking for a high redemption rate, I think you want to make sure, again, you're doing your research and you're going to places where there's going to be that ability to redeem. And if you get these properties, because I think in West Virginia, more so than probably any of the other states that we service, there's a very good likelihood, that even if you go in and buy, say you buy 100 properties, I think it's fair to say on 10%, if not more, there's a good chance you're going to end up with a tax deed. Okay, so then what are you going to do with those properties? How are you going to maximize that return on investment? And one of the problems you run into is, you've got that 3-year statute of limitations. So do you have the contacts in that state to say, okay, if I get the tax deed, if I want to liquidate these properties, quicker than the 3 years. And I basically want to sell them subject to a potential challenge. So they may have a market value of 100,000. You're not going to sell them for 100,000 because you got a 3-year statute of limitations. And even if you provide the documents that show, hey, we did all the noticing, it was in strict compliance, that doesn't prevent litigation. So there's still a risk there.
Right.
So you can contract to sell those out, and if you're going to do that, who's your potential market? Your potential market there is a landlord that's maybe renting to college students. So are you in Morgantown? Are you here in Cabell County with Marshall University? Are you in Kanawha County with Capital and people that where there's a high rental market? If you end up in a smaller rural county and you end up with 15 properties that didn't redeem, and you have to fly into Charleston, West Virginia, and it takes you 4 hours to drive there, and you're going to market these properties for a year, how are you gonna get that return on investment for those? So I think your point's well taken, that you really need to come into the state with a strategy on, this is what I want to try to accomplish with redemption, and based on the amount of money I want to invest, here are the counties that I think that would work. And I think probably realistically, you're probably looking at somewhere at about 40% of the counties that I would say, hey, I think this is a good market for that. And then if I do end up with a tax deed and I want to try to sell those, or do I have a strategy for the properties that are fantastic, that I get a tax deed that I'm going to hold on for 3 years, and then what am I going to do with those? And so, I think it's a great opportunity, but it's a lot different, like you mentioned, Florida, or even in Kentucky. Where in Kentucky, you're basically going to push it to foreclosure. You're going to get you're either going to get your redemption, or you're going to get your money back at the foreclosure sale.
Right.
Here, your return on investment could be $100,000 house for a $800 tax bill.
Right.
Which is fantastic. But at the same time, I think you have to have a tailored investment strategy to come into the state. I think it works great for some, and I think obviously that type of business strategy won't work well with other investors.
I think it highlights probably the most popular question I get, or we get at TSR from new investors looking to expand, is, where should I buy? And our immediate question back to everybody is, well, what's your model? What's your strategy, right?
Yep.
And it sounds like that's even more amplified in West Virginia, right? You really need to define that, and everybody should define, okay, what is your end goal out of this? Are you looking to really just earn an interest? Are you looking to buy real estate out of this investment strategy? What type of real estate, right? Rentals versus fix and flip, right? All of that plays
right
into that eventual suggestion on where you should buy and what you should buy. And so West Virginia is no exception, and probably amplified compared to a lot of areas.
And that's not to say, I don't want to suggest that there's not an opportunity, I believe there's great opportunity in West Virginia. I just think it really takes some time to sit down and map out a cohesive strategy to make sure that, at the end of year 2 or 3, you're going to have a strategy that self-propels. Because I tell you, one of the things that I've seen in West Virginia, and I think that this can happen even with a small investor, is that you can start to acquire your tax lien certificates, get your redemption, because one of the things I don't think I mentioned is it's 1% per month during the redemption period. Plus you're entitled to the taxes, charges up to $500, and then other statutory charges, such as there's certain fees that can be reimbursed if I do a title search, other things like that. So the ability to recoup cost and make money at the redemption stage is there. But also then you get some of the properties and you sell them at a discount to one of the local rental companies that rents to college kids. The better ones you hold on to. You start to amass capital that you can then reinvest. And so a 3 to 5 year strategy, assuming that things go the way they should, if you've got a 3-tier strategy, because one of the cost of money in this industry is one of the biggest things we have to keep an eye on. here in West Virginia, you can create a strategy. And again, this isn't going to create enough capital that you're going to be able to then spread it out in South Carolina, Alabama, Florida. But you could make basically a closed circuit in West Virginia, where after a few years you're establishing the capital that you need to self-propel your investment. So you're not having to go out and borrow, which I think is one of the benefits of West Virginia that you don't always see in some of the other states.
Right. Yeah, that is unique. Well, it's I'm going to get back to kind of the mechanics of,
Yes.
of the process, and as far as the sales occurring in October, November, and then the sale itself. It's a bid up state, right? Because can you describe
Yes.
that a little bit more? I guess, is it a standard? Okay, you're there with a paddle, bidding up with an auctioneer, live. Is that? Do I have?
Yeah. So you'll literally go in, and it's now it says it's on the courthouse steps, but like I said, most of the time, it's inside the courthouse. The sheriff is there, and it's going to start with a minimum bid, and that minimum bid is going to include taxes, charges due, the regular stuff, and then it's going to bid up from that point.
Okay. Now that also call it premium, right? The amount above the tax amount and I guess opening bid amount. Does that, you mentioned interest being 1% a month. Does that premium earn that same 1% a month, or is that 1% a month only on the opening bid?
Yes. So it is 1% per month on the tax lien certificate amount.
Okay. So the premium you bid does not earn any interest. Is that accurate?
No. So and let me go and let me find the statute here.
Or is when you say tax lien certificate amount, that's the opening bid plus the.
Yeah, that's the ultimate amount that it sells for. Now, there are certain aspects at the end of the redemption period that you're not going to get your interest on. And I'm trying to find my.
So there's a few fees, et cetera, that you won't be bearing interest on.
And I tell you, and if anybody has a question on that, they can feel free to shoot me an email. But
the big ones are, do I earn interest on that premium or not? And you do in West Virginia, which is I guess advantageous to the investor. And then as far as
and I guess let me say this. So with regard, so the statute that you want to look at is 11A323, okay. And basically there it says that where it articulates total amount, it says taxes, charges due on the date of the sale, all other taxes that they would pay on the property, reasonable expenses up to $500. Anything past $500 you're not going to get. And then and that total amount will give you interest. When you look at, the purchaser is also entitled to statutory costs, but those statutory costs aren't going to give you, or you're not going to get any interest on those statutory costs.
Reimbursed for them.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Now, and then obviously, I guess what is due at the auction is the total bid amount, not. And the reason I'm clarifying. Yeah. There are some states like Maryland, we only have to come with a percentage of that total bid. West Virginia have to come with the total bid amount for whatever liens you chose to purchase.
And it's that by close of business that day.
That day, okay.
And again, because most of the time, honestly, you're looking at somewhere between $500 and $1,500. Are the lien amounts. So it's not like South Carolina, where you're going to be paying astronomical amounts for the at the time.
You're not bidding up to 60-70% of the market value or more.
Right.
Even more aggressive in South Carolina. Okay, now as far as all right, I've gone to the auction, I've bought these liens. What other responsibilities do I have as the investor is there any other notices that I have to do? Is there anything that I have to take care of in that redemption period, we'll call it, that I'm responsible for?
Yes, and let me grab I mixed my notes up here. Okay, so following the sale, the sheriff is going to do a few things that we don't have to worry about, and they're going to be dealing with the state auditor's office. So obviously, I'm sure this is probably similar in most states, but your assessor is just assessing the amount. The sheriff is responsible for collecting. And then when you're looking at noticing and redemption, you start dealing with Russ Rollerson and in the state auditor's office. And so after August 31st of the year following the sheriff's sale and before October 31st of that same year, the purchaser, you have to prepare a list of all the persons that need to be served for redemption. And now that needs to not only include property owners, but say you got a mortgage on there, you got judgment liens, and anybody that is entitled to notice under the statute. And obviously this is important too, if you get the tax deed for quiet title, because again, if you want to quiet it, you're going to have to show that you provided notice during this period. Also, if there's a challenge to set aside, this is one of the biggest areas of potential mistake. And it's not only did we provide notice, but did we get the correct addresses? You know, and because again, what our state is requiring more and more strict compliance. So they're not going to look at constructive. A lot of times they're wanting you to go out of your way to show you did absolutely everything possible. And they want actual notice, you know, as opposed to constructive notice.
So you put together, I guess the investor puts together that list. I guess to translate that probably means a title search. I guess, is this typically where the investor would engage you?
Yeah, and so a lot of times so throughout the year we'll work with them, and we know what the portfolio looks like in West Virginia, and we're assisting them as they're in different counties. Then on August 31st, we'll usually get, you know, the list as it exists at that all the properties that didn't redeem. And then at that point, we'll go and, you know, conduct the title searches, put the list together, and submit that information. You've got to provide the auditor with the physical mailing address of the property if it's a Class 2 property. And that's really the only one of the things that we had talked about earlier was different classes of property. You know, for our purposes, investor purposes, that residential Class 2 listing is really the only thing, and far and away that's the majority of the properties we're going to be dealing with. So you have to have the physical location, and again, that goes to actual notice to the physical location, because especially if you have a landlord and then they want the tenant to also get notice of what's happening. You have to provide a list of expenses incurred after January 1st. You have to pay the state auditor the sum to cover the cost of preparing and serving the notices to redeem. And so, you know, that's another thing. You've got to work with the state auditor's office, get those calculations, and then get them the fees so they can send that out. And then present a certificate of sale to the state auditor. So, you know, and again, all of these things, the relationship thing we talked about earlier, because I know that list, as you read it off, it can sound a little mundane, but it's really formulaic, and you're working closely with the auditor's office. If you do this enough times, you know what they're looking for. You know that on some of these, you're going to get a response back from the auditor and say, hey, on all these, we couldn't get it. You've got 14 days. You need to provide us additional information. But from a servicing standpoint, when you're looking at the investor's portfolio, that's really the time period that's critical to get everything in line, so that if we go and we get that tax deed, they won't be able to challenge to set it aside. And it's not only the property owner facing, but it's also the auditor's office facing. You want to try to eliminate potential, because the state auditor's office can step in and create some issues as well if they're not satisfied. So you want to make sure you're managing both of those relationships and satisfying everything that's required.
Now, is it? I'm assuming, correct if I'm wrong, but like that whole interaction between the auditor, pulling the title searches, putting the list together, notifying the auditor, doing all of that. That's what I guess Nelson Mullins does, right?
Yeah, that's part of, so on the, like for specifically West Virginia, that's servicing, and that makes August 31st to October 31st a very busy couple months.
Right.
You know, because you're trying to get all of that. You know, so if folks do have portfolios, you know, by this time, August or September, we usually know everyone that we're going to be working with as it's coming, because it's, again, some of our counties are online. You can do the title searches online. Some of them we actually have to go there. So it's a little bit onerous process, but the nice thing is, for the title search, you guys are going to be reimbursed $500 for, those fees.
Right.
And so usually we enter into, some type of agreement so that when we go through that process of servicing, that's something that can be recouped.
Got it. Okay. Is there, besides that, I'll say notice list, is there anything else that's required by the investor during that 18-month redemption period?
No, and I would say that, the important thing here is that under 11A319, if you don't comply with this, and you're not working with the auditor and you're not making sure that you're meeting these notice requirements, you lose the benefit of the tax lien. And so it's important, and it's such a short cycle if you think about it. I mean, you've got, which is it's positive in some respects, because in some of these states this stuff can get tied down for years. Right. Here you're looking at an 18-month window, but again, you want to make sure that you comply, because the statute's pretty clear that if these things aren't done, then you're going to lose the benefit. And if the auditor's office doesn't catch it on the front end, and there's an action to set aside on the back end, that's going to be the basis for overturning the tax.
That makes it unenforceable. Not necessarily. Yeah. Does it nearly
void?
Yeah. Could I venture to say it's worthless paper if you don't? Okay.
Yeah, it would be void or voidable. So, I mean, essentially it would go in and it would void, and it would, usually the order is that it's placed back into the recording as if that tax deed was never issued.
Okay. So it's not just that it's challengeable. You flat can't get a deed unless you go through those steps, correct? Well,
if the auditor catches it and there are issues, there can be a refusal for the issuance. If it's not and it's challenged, then that tax deed will be set aside as if it was, never existed.
Got it. Okay. All right. So you hand that list over to the auditor, they do their thing, and then come, sounds like starting April 1st of the next year. So roughly 18 months after the sale is when you can start applying for a tax deed.
Yeah, this is my favorite part about West Virginia, because it's the easiest. At that point, you walk in on April 1st and you say, here's my tax lien certificate. Here's what I've done, issued the tax deed, and the tax deed's issued. Okay. And so, at that point, you are owner of the property, encumbrance free.
Now, I guess a couple of questions here. You can start on an April 1st date. How long do you have? Like, does it expire after a certain period of time?
Yeah, so when you reach the end of that statutory prescribed period, and again, that's one of those things that we're arguing over a little bit right now, because we think that there's a little bit of discrepancy between the due process period that's supposed to run 18 months from October 14th through November 23rd. So obviously that's a month and a half, the 6-week period. So that should shift, if it's April 1st is when you could apply. Our position has often been that, well, if it wasn't until November 22nd, that would shift it down the road a little bit when you're 18-month period. But, I think at this point, what I would recommend to clients is, yes, if you get to the outside of that statutory period, it is null and void, and the tax lien certificate has no force and effect. Okay. So, as we go forward, the better solution is to walk in on April 1st, attempt to get your tax deed issued, and let them reject it or say you're early. Okay, fine, then we're safe. Then we'll come back. Otherwise, if it's issued, no harm, no foul.
Okay, but you definitely have to apply for that within the 18-month period. Otherwise, you don't have the right to apply for that.
Right.
Right. Okay. So it's not like you can sit on these for 7 years, like in Florida.
No.
Take action.
Right. Like in Kentucky, where you've got 10+1 years to enforce. And so you may have 3 different people who all have different numbers of tax liens and all the, here, the process, and I actually, I really like it because it maximizes the use of the property. Right. If you don't, I think our system in West Virginia was developed to make sure you don't have these abandoned properties sit around with nobody using them. It's the highest and best use for the property. So it wants to move as quickly as possible while also preserving the due process rights of the property owner. But again, so I think that investors with an eye towards property ownership or rental, this is again a good state. And that's not to say that there's not redemption potential, but when you look at the population of the state, 1.8 million people, you're capping your potential return on investment just by the limited number of the population and the properties that are going to be available in the 55 counties.
Right. Well, I can relate to that. I'm originally from Montana. With I guess they just went over the 1 million people mark a couple years ago, and there's really only a few counties in the whole state of 56 counties. It's actually very similar. 56 counties that are really worth, I'd say, an institutional level investor attending, because there's just not the volume, right? And I'm assuming West Virginia is very similar. It's just not the volume in most counties, other than the few metro areas. Okay, so I guess quick question on that 18 months from the sale to you need to get a deed. Obviously, there's another cycle of taxes in there. Is it I guess either the responsibility of the investor to pay those? Is it the right of the tax buyer to buy those as I'll call subsequent liens? I guess, how does that work in that time period?
Yeah, and so the at that point, depending on how the assessor handles it. So if it goes to sale, if you pay subsequent taxes as the tax lien certificate holder, those are, you can recoup those, and that goes into the statute that I read earlier that talks about all other taxes paid on the property. The other issue, though, is that because of the way the statutory time period works, during that 18-month period, you're not going to get to a second sale, because that sale for those taxes in that year wouldn't come up until October 14th at the earliest, and you're getting your tax deed in April. So you could, if you wanted to, pay them, and just prevent that, especially if you're going to get the tax deed and it just makes sense. It makes it easier so that you don't get accidentally caught up into a cycle.
Right.
But because of the quick time frame here, you're not going to be in a situation where there normally is going to be a second tax lien certificate sold on that same property.
Okay. So you can buy the subsequent taxes. You do earn interest on those subsequent taxes? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you wanted if you found that, I'll say, the sweet spot of what highly likely redeems, and you want to place additional capital, you could do that and earn that additional 1% a month on that amount as well when that time comes. You'd have that right.
And the only thing I'd say is at that point, you've probably got a pretty good idea, because taxes are paid March 1st and September 1st. And so, and halves. Mm-hmm. And so by that March 1st time period, you've probably got a pretty good idea if you've got any hits, if there's going to be a redemption. Traditionally at that point, you've provided notices that need to go out, and you're looking at the issuance of the tax deeds. So I don't know that from an investment perspective, you're going to pick up a ton by getting a second lien. It's not something that it's not something I see a lot, I guess, in West Virginia.
Gotcha. Not today, anyway.
That's right. Right.
All right. So I've done all my process. I went April 1st. I have this deed in hand. It is without any encumbrances, or most, but you mentioned with a couple exceptions. What are some examples of some of those exceptions? I'm assuming IRS liens, maybe.
Yeah, and those are some. And again, you can. In West Virginia, it's a super priority lien, and I never want to say a blanket. Hey, it eradicates everything. I have not experienced an issue where we've provided if there's an IRS lien out there, most of the time when you do the title search, you're going to find it. You're going to provide notice to them. So those issues are usually dealt with on the front end. And so I really put that caveat in there to say it is a super priority lien. But again, I don't want to say unequivocally that there is nothing out there that couldn't remain.
Okay.
But most of the time you're talking about other tax liens.
Okay. So, but there aren't things, I guess I'll use examples in Florida that stick out all the time, right? There's municipal fines, IRS liens, that kind of stuff is more of the exception, not the norm in West Virginia.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We just don't see municipal, and it's probably a product of just how, so we don't have a city in West Virginia currently that I think has a population of greater than 50,000 people.
Okay.
So it's smaller communities.
Okay. So counties aren't yet viewing that as a revenue potential.
And quite frankly, it's just like with, like in Rhode Island, fire district taxes and those different, like we don't have things like that we traditionally see. Got
it. Okay. So you've got this deed. It's free usually free of all other encumbrances, but they've got this 3-year option of somebody, I'll say, to challenge it, right? Set the tax deed aside. Does that mean that tax deed is not insurable for that 3 years unless you go through a quiet title process?
Yeah, and so, and that's I guess the caveat that where I don't always, and I know there's always new products coming out. And I can think of a couple that are tied into NTLA, where they're coming. And so, always check, I guess, with those entities and see what products they have. Our recommendation, though, is to do a quiet title action. And a lot of time we do, we call it, essentially quiet title and eviction at the same time. Eviction is called something different in West Virginia, but just for ease, quiet title and eviction if you've got anybody that remains in the property.
Okay. So you can wait. I guess there's 3 options, right? You could use, right. I call title certification services. Meridian Title is one, tax title services is another. And there may be others out there that provide that in West Virginia. That's option 1. Option 2 is going through a quiet title action, an additional lawsuit. And I think you mentioned that's an 8 to 10 month period.
Yeah, just trying to get it through the judicial system.
Right.
I think it's not overly onerous, but it is. Most of your time is just filing it and trying to get service on everybody to the point where you can either get them to disclaim interest or get default judgment. And so going through that, usually takes some time.
Now, is that quiet title process something Nelson Mullins helps with as well? Okay.
We do.
One-stop shop. Okay. And then option 3 is if you want, you can just wait through. If you're fine waiting 3 years, you can just wait 3 years, right? And deal with it if it comes up, or just bide your time and wait.
And again, what we say a lot of times is that you could still liquidate these properties, and there's a way that you could contract to liquidate these properties where you're essentially putting the potential buyer on notice that you're taking these subject to potential challenge under the statute that allows for 3-year redemption period. And that's the price is going to consider that potential risk downstream. So again, you've got a $100,000 property. You're not going to sell it for $100,000, but you could sell it to somebody who is local, that's used to dealing with those issues, that says, you know what, I'll purchase this. You're going to give me a reduced price. I'll purchase, because all of this is freely assignable. The tax lien certificates in West Virginia are freely assignable. Tax deeds are assignable. So you could, sell it at that point. Then they take on the risk of, a potential challenge down the road, or take it, free once that period expires. And then it's just up to you to negotiate the best deal you can, but again, if it's a $100,000 property and we just say you had $1,500 in it, plus, some of the other charges. So let's say you had $5,000 in it. If you sold that property for $50K, that's still a nice return on investment, time value of money. You're not holding it on for 3 years. So, again, there's a way to do it to make a significant return on investment if you're in the right markets. But again, if you're in a small rural county, the odds that you're going to find a potential buyer for that property are much more limited than if you're in one of our college towns, the capital, someplace like that over by Washington, D.C., where there's a large market and potential buyers for that.
Right. Is it, how's that conveyed? Is that a quitclaim deed conveyance, or is that a special warranty deed?
Well, and again, that would be, and that's something that we do as well, but that would be, through the negotiation, process. Obviously, I would joke and say, only kind of joking, it depends who my client is, and how we're going to negotiate the deal, and we're going to try to get the best deal we can. Obviously, we're going to want to make sure that you are full disclosure, so that there's no issue and everybody understands what you're getting, because you want to limit liability back on the seller, because you want to be done with this, and we are giving you a premium price here because you are going to take on this potential risk.
Right.
And they understand if there's a challenge, and they've we always go through, you've looked at all the noticing documents, you've looked at everything, we've let your attorneys review them, that everybody believes that we're in compliance. So you want to make sure you go through all those steps, so that if there is a challenge and something happens, you don't get drugged back in.
Got it. Okay. Now, help me understand a little bit of at the sale. Do all the liens sell at the auction, or do some go back to the county? And I guess, is there the option for somebody to come in and buy those from the county over the counter after the fact? How does that work?
So yeah, they're basically three levels. Not all liens sell. And then what will happen is it'll go to a special commissioner at the state level. And then if they don't sell there, they'll go to the auditor's office. And Russ Rolliston, who I deal with and I enjoy working with. And so he will have, you can make arrangements. Usually they'll have sales of property, that the state's holding. At that point, it's more land speculation. That's, I don't usually see my investor clients, because you think about it, if it's made it through that many levels,
right,
there's probably something. And West Virginia has what's known as phantom parcels, and I'm sure that's not just specific to West Virginia, but I tend to see it here maybe more than other states. And the obligation is on the purchaser to do their due diligence. Mm-hmm. And so the assessor is going to sell, or the assessor is going to turn the books over. The sheriff's going to sell what's there. Before you go in there, you're supposed to know what you're buying. And so if you end up with a phantom parcel, which is something that may have been on the books in 1872 and got incorporated or something else, and it's not there anymore, that's on you. And you've got a year to go back and try to recoup what you've paid. But I think, the obligation there, and I don't want to get too far off your question, I want to come back, but again, I think it speaks to the importance of making sure you've done your due diligence. Again, and that's why having local folks in West Virginia is again important. Making sure, hey, I'm interested in these properties. And so a lot of the properties that are going to the special commissioner or to the state level are going to be properties that are undeveloped. They may be mineral rights. Obviously, West Virginia, probably like Montana, that's a huge issue.
Right.
Timber rights. But for most of my investors, they're not looking to timber. They're not looking to mine. And they're not looking for undeveloped properties. And so I think that's where, if you are interested in that, there's probably some good opportunities there, but it's not something that our clients usually hire us to get involved in.
Got it. Okay. I guess a couple questions to wrap up here, Randy. One, well, I know you're probably well plugged into, state statutes, any process changes. Is there anything out there that you foresee coming down the pipeline that might change the process in any way in the near future?
So this last legislative session, West Virginia is a 60-day session. And we are currently, forever, West Virginia was controlled primarily by the Democrat Party. Until recently now, we now have Republican governor, Republican Senate, and Republican House. We saw a lot of changes to the tax assessment statutes that go in effect in 2022. And so, then they're actually looking, and folks may have seen this, West Virginia was looking at doing away with some personal property taxes, looking away at vehicle tax, doing away with personal income tax, much like Tennessee and Florida. And so they're looking at a lot of different tax types of legislation. So far, it hasn't really kind of bled over into this area, but we're keeping a close eye on it, because anytime they start to get into this, and obviously when you start eliminating taxes in some areas, you need to start increasing taxes in other areas and fees in other areas and stuff like that. So, I think it's a good question, and I think it's I would say as of right now, there's nothing that is imminently on the horizon, but it's something that we're watching as they're taking a look at all this stuff.
Got it. Okay. And I guess to kind of close things out, I guess of all the various, and there's many, right? Potholes, pitfalls, whatever you want to call them in the tax sale space. I guess as far as West Virginia is concerned, what would be the number one, pothole that people could and should, easily avoid?
I think it goes back, and I've probably beat this horse to death, but I think it really is not going in blind. Making sure that you want to come in, because I tell you, I think West Virginia is a great state for new, smaller investors that want to kind of dip their toe and see how this will work. I think it's a great opportunity for large investors, assuming that it fits their business model. And so I think making sure that you do the due diligence on the front end, I think the key to being able to make money and make money quickly, which is why folks are doing this, is to do the due diligence on the front end. Make sure you understand where you're going, you understand the jurisdictions that you're purchasing in, and that you've got the right connections to be able to move through the process, so that you don't make, some of the obvious, easy mistakes.
Okay.
I guess is that, I think because there's not, outside of that one thing, that I would say, hey, just don't do X, Y, or Z.
It's a pretty common response, which is actually my exact opinion of do your due diligence, know what you're doing. Don't just start buying. Sounds like West Virginia has a little more forgiveness in that and allow you to come back and ask for your money back, but many states aren't as forgiving. But just know what you're doing before you dive in, right?
Right.
Excellent. Well, Randy, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know we're going to be able to have you back, hopefully in the near future. We'll talk about some of the other states you guys cover. I sincerely appreciate your time today, and I'm sure everyone listening learned as much as I did, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Hey, I really appreciate it, and have a great week, and yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Randy.